Now, the one and only question is, does creatine raise DHT? Based on the available data to date, the answer is simply no. Howdy doody everyone, and just a quick video today just to discuss the impact, or lack thereof, of creatine on the progression of hair loss. Now, there's a lot of conjecture in the hair loss community, so today we're going to be jumping into some of the more recent literature to see if there's any impact at all on systemic hormone levels. Now, first and foremost, creatine is one of the most studied and reputable, quote-unquote, natural supplements for athletic endeavors, and it's pretty understandable that folks who are keen to better understand the potential risks and downsides when taking the drug, particularly with respect to hair loss. Now, much of the debate and caution regarding creatine stems from this one study by Vandermeer, which looked at the impact of creatine on serum hormone levels. Now, the concern arises because the subjects experienced what they deemed a statistically significant increase in serum DHT levels. So it was 56% higher after the loading period and 40% after the 14-day maintenance period. Now, during these periods, subjects were given 25 grams a day for the loading period and 5 grams a day thereafter for the maintenance period. Now, to their credit, the study was a double-blinded with a placebo pill, and we can get into actual creatine supplementation in a later video, but for now, note that this is a pretty common approach with regards to the loading and maintenance phase in terms of dosage. Now, on the surface, this is obviously very concerning, given the established link between DHT and hair loss. For the last 20-25 years, 5-hour inhibitors like finasteride and dutasteride, which inhibit the production of the 5-hour enzyme and thus T to DHT, have been the gold standard medication in terms of treating hair loss. Now, there are some pretty key items to consider with this particular study, namely the fact that free T was not measured, and there was no increase in total testosterone levels in the 16 males that completed this study. Furthermore, the study's results have not actually been replicated to date. Now, a further 2021 study dived into some of the misconceptions around creatine, and with respect to hair loss, they concluded, and I quote, "The majority of available evidence does not support a link between creatine supplementation and hair loss/baldness." To me, what's key is that the studies indicated there was no meaningful movement in testosterone, free testosterone, and specifically DHT from the consumption of creatine. Now, something really key to consider here is the actual pathways by which DHT is formed within the body, and the fact that it does not make any sense at all that DHT increased more than 40% with no measurable difference in testosterone levels, which we'll jump into now. I did a really good video that walked through the pathways from testosterone to DHT and estradiol, so feel free to search in my channel bar and look up the impact on my hormones. I'll try and link it in the description box later. In summary, however, if you think about hormone conversion in terms of a set of scales or simple algebraic equations even, DHT does not miraculously form out of nothing. It has to convert from testosterone via the 5-AR enzyme. That's one of the pathways, and the other main pathway is the aromatase pathway, whereby testosterone converts to estradiol. Now, we all know that 5-hour inhibition via 1 milligram daily finasteride results in approximately 10 to 15% increase in serum testosterone levels and consequently estradiol, due to the fact that testosterone cannot convert to DHT in the same quantum due to the impact of finasteride inhibiting the production of the 5-AR enzyme, which can in of itself reduce DHT levels by up to about 60 to 70%. Now, as we've discussed in other videos, there is diminishing returns once you get past 0.5 to 1 milligram of finasteride daily, which is why a lot of folks recommend a much lower dosage, particularly for folks new to the drug and are worried about potential side effects with the drug. Now, we can clearly see here that there remains a balanced equation in terms of hormone reduction pre and post finasteride. Now, turning our attention back to creatine though, this is the only way the Vandermeer study would make any sense at all is under two scenarios. One, if it upregulated 5-AR activity, which means that more testosterone is being converted to DHT. Based on this, the study should have shown that there was more or less even some reduction in remaining serum testosterone levels because more has been converted to DHT. This is pretty much the opposite effect of finasteride, whereby you have an increase in testosterone levels because less is converting to DHT. And the second scenario is if creatine increased testosterone levels to such a significant point whereby you had a 40% increase in DHT. But as we know, that's not what the study said, or concluded, or what subsequent studies have said at all. There's been no measurable impact on T, DHT, estradiol from the consumption of creatine. Now, just for completeness sake, if we were on exogenous steroids or testosterone, we can understand pretty quickly why it accelerates hair loss. Finasteride, which inhibits almost 60 to 70% of DHT, is clinically proven to be effective for the treatment of male pattern baldness. Now, if we were getting a super physiological dose of testosterone and we converted at the same rate for our pathways into DHT and to estradiol, we would have a massive increase in systemic DHT, which will obviously accelerate the progression of balding. Now, some may think this is a simplistic way to look at it, but it just points to the fact that this study in and of itself is not enough to form a solid viewpoint as to the impact of creatine on DHT production, least of all contributing to hair loss down the line. To me, in fact, it seems contradictory given the fact that all the subsequent data doesn't point to any meaningful movement in T, total T, free T, or DHT. Now, to just put my corporate finance hat on for a moment, we know that elevated levels of DHT can cause acne, hair loss, prostate cancer, BPH, heart disease. There's a mountain of evidence to suggest that elevated levels of DHT come with a number of potential health conditions. If there was an undeniable link between creatine and DHT, then I'm struggling to see why this supplement would have been pulled off the market already. If you think about creatine as an actual product that a manufacturer will prepare much in the same vein as protein powder, pre-workout, or whatever, my understanding based on my experience in the supplement space is that the gross margins on creatine pretty much max out at 20%, and you're much more likely to be getting margins in the realm of 15, 10% perhaps even, depending on where your market is. For the layman, this means that if you needed to sell, you would need to sell $100,000 worth of creatine in order to make $10,000 to $15,000 at the gross profit level prior to any consideration of overheads. In and of itself, this isn't lucrative at all, and it's not a product that you effectively want to be pushing. It's much more of a volume game. To me, that's why you see a lot of fitness folk putting out, elaborately formulated pre-workouts or looking for the first mover advantage in being able to capture much more higher margin products. Oftentimes, retailers will still stock creatine, though, simply due to the fact that it gets you through the door and looking at higher margin products. This is often referred to as a loss leader when you walk into a Costco looking for milk and walk out with a new flat screen TV. In the case of a GNC or a store that sells supplements, where they get you is in fact this protein shaker. They make much better margins on the actual shaker than they do on selling you the product that you're putting in the shaker, which is paradoxical in itself. Now, anecdotally, as I mentioned, I've been in all the 3 different buckets in terms of using creatine without finasteride, using creatine on finasteride, and using finasteride without creatine. And frankly, I didn't notice any change in the acceleration of hair loss under these different scenarios. Now, if you're relatively more susceptible to androgenic alopecia than myself and you've hopped on creatine, the data just isn't really there to definitively confirm that you're going to result in an increase in DHT levels and accelerate your balding down the line. Now, just to look at some anecdotes that we've stripped from some other creatine videos. Thomas Smith here started taking creatine at age 18, constantly for about 10 years. Thinks he's genetically predisposed to male pattern baldness in the last 1 to 2 years. Has shown some thinning in the crown temples. And I think he's right here. Like, it's much more, what's your genetic response? Do you have it in your family? Is it something that you're susceptible to, rather than I take creatine, then I'm going to start balding hair? It's just not going to work. Night Owl, interesting name. Great video. Recurring theme I noticed is the gene for hair loss. So what they're talking about here is it's where people get hung up a bit too much, in my opinion, is that they're worried about serum DHT levels, and it's not serum DHT levels. You can have 2 people with exactly the same hormone profile, and one will bald much quicker than the other because they're genetically predisposed at the follicular level to balding. It doesn't matter what's circulating in their blood, it's in the actual hair follicle that's creating issues for them. 3 years on 5 grams a day, almost 40 years old, 0 hair loss. Yep, good on ya. Done pretty well to make it to 40 years without any hair loss. I'll give you that. Orbitals. AZ, the main takeaway is that yes, it will speed up your hair loss if you have the gene for male pattern baldness. That's just not true. The data, as we've seen, shows that it doesn't increase DHT. The available data does not point to that. So it's not a statement that we can get on board with here. The people that are saying they haven't had no hair loss are the ones with good hair genes. He's probably right there, though. If your family's got bald patches and receding, I figure he's going to say here that you're probably going to accelerate your balding if you take creatine. Ultimately, though, creatine's not the needle mover here. It's your genetic sensitivity. Final thoughts. Now, I think the main takeaway with this infamous rugby player study is that everyone's up in arms about with respect to creatine is that, in my opinion, I think the study's bullshit. The results have not been able to be replicated in any subsequent studies, and the study's own conclusions around the lack of movement in total testosterone relative to DHT just don't make sense. One of those 2 levers has to move, as we discussed above, and without that, I can't wrap my head around this study at all. So, in conclusion, just take your creatine. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye.